everybody. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us today. I'm really delighted to be able to see you all here. And yeah, Herb is right. We met almost a year ago today, and when he was organising this event, he asked me if I would talk a little bit about passion, which I believe is the single most important driving force in the world today, basically. It's the single force that creates everything that's good all around us. And he also asked me if I would speak a little bit about my life story, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'm going to begin by telling you that I grew up not far away from here, actually, in a tiny little village called Garstang, and it was minute. I mean, about 1,000 people lived there. It was practically just a ledge on the edge of the Pennines, really, and it was pre-internet, decades and decades before the internet, so incredibly isolated little place, really, and my great passion in life was music, but music was such an extraordinarily difficult commodity to come by in those days. You literally had to take your savings to the local toy shop, Mia's toy shop, lay down your money and wait 9 weeks once you'd ordered a record for it to actually arrive at the toy shop. I also lived in a household where my father, for some completely inexplicable reason, had banned all music from the house, and in spite of the fact that I collected 7-inch singles by the Sex Pistols. I stashed them in my little sock drawer. In spite of the fact that they were the most treasured possessions in my life, he would routinely find them and smash them to pieces. The one thing that he never found, though, was a tiny little transistor radio that I had, which was literally about the size of a sardine can. And I used to lie in the dead of night with my blankets over the top of my head, like scrolling across the dial on this tiny little transistor radio, looking for John Peel. And John Peel, I guess for me, stood at the gateway to this incredible alternate universe, a universe that I would never have known existed without his radio show. And it was a really incredible time for the BBC at that point as well, because they'd actually banned punk rock altogether in their infinite wisdom, thinking it would be deeply damaging to society. But John decided that he was going to go ahead and play punk rock in spite of all this. And what he used to do was drop a Sex Pistols record on the radio, but he would then announce it as a Pink Fairies record. And obviously none of the BBC management were any the wiser at the time. But it was John Peel's great passion that inspired me so much as a young child in a tiny village, kind of completely divorced from culture at any level, really, at all. And excuse me. Anyway, I guess the other thing that I had in my life, the one other thing that I had in my life that I thought, this is evidence that this kind of utopian world that I'm aiming to reach as an adult exists, was a music paper called Sounds. And once again, if you wanted to buy this paper, you actually had to go to the newsagents, lay your money down, and it would ordinarily be delivered probably about 3 weeks late, but it would be there. And NME existed at that point as well, who I went on to write for, but they were very much consumed by Marxist politics at the time, and I didn't really understand what they were talking about at all. Sounds was much more of a straight-ahead kind of rock and punk paper. And once again, I thought, Jesus Christ, you know, here is evidence that this alternate universe seems to exist, this utopia. I must head for it right away. And so I thought, God, what would the editor of Sounds need to see? And I thought, well, surely I must be able to show him that I've actually worked for a band. And I thought, that's kind of difficult given my circumstances, but this is what I must aim to do. I've got to really get a job with a band. That's the only way. I mean, it never occurred to me to do anything as simple as maybe just writing a review and sending it into Sounds. For some reason, it just never occurred to me to do anything like that. I felt certain that this was the way forwards. So in Garstang, the village that I grew up in, there was a tiny little working man's club. It was called the Liberal Club, and about twice a year they used to book a live band. And I remember the day that they had a huge chalkboard on the wall, the day that the sign went up on the chalkboard and it said, "Heretic from London." And I thought, this is it, this is my big moment. I'm going to get a job with this band and I'm going to move to London, this is it. And to cut a long story short, I went to the gig, I spoke to the band, and I said to the band, you know, I would do anything to come and work for you. What is it that you need that I can bring to you? And they said to me, well, if you can make a backdrop for us, a proper backdrop the size of this stage, paint our logo on it and bring it to London, we'll give you a job. So that's exactly what I did. I went to a shop in Preston that sold out old, it was material they had left over from the wartime that they used to make blackout curtains with. And I bought reams and reams and reams of this stuff and spent hours painting the band's logo onto this backdrop, and I rolled it all up, jumped on a train to London and took it down there. And to cut an incredibly long story short, I ended up living on a bus in a car park with a band called Heretic for a year, and that's what I did. And we all used to work these really crappy day jobs. A couple of the band were grave diggers, and a couple of the band worked in this factory where dog dishes went past on a conveyor belt like this, and they just used to stick the sticker on the bottom of the dog dish as it went past. And you know, this is how we spent our time, and we did that so that we could gather together all the money that we possibly could to fix this knackered old bus that we used to live on, which we called the Blue Goose Hotel. And we also had backline, we had lighting equipment, we had guitars and all the rest of it. But in those days, it was very much a kind of pay-to-play situation, whereby if you went to a gig, you were really lucky to get half a lager and 5 straws. Normally, you had to pay to actually, you know, have the privilege of playing there. But we kind of rationed ourselves. So there was a chippy at the edge of the car park, and we used to literally live on a bag of chips a day and save all the rest of our money to do all the repairs that were necessary and to book a tour. And it was really funny to me. I mean, people say to me now, Jesus Christ, how on earth did you manage to live for an entire year on a bus? But for me, it was the first foothold on the causeway, basically. And I was just elated to have this job. And I would say that the sanitation was relatively challenging because, you know, obviously, all you had available to you really was the local public toilet, which was about half a mile up the road, and you would go with a little sponge bag, you know, in the depths of January and be rolling up your clothing sort of an inch at a time, trying to get a decent wash. But for me, it really was, you know, it was the beginning of the journey, and I really couldn't have conceived of doing it another way, and it was my passion that drove me. Completely blindly, some may say completely insanely, but that's all I had really at that point. I didn't have anything else, you know. And I remember thinking to myself, what's the other thing that the editor of Sounds would want to see? How the hell can I get a job at this paper, you know? I've got the experience now of working for a band, and I thought I'll write a fanzine. I must be able to show that I can publish my own magazine. So I got another couple of extra jobs at night working in bars, and I saved up all the money that I had, and I produced a couple of issues of this little fanzine called Crush, and I sent it to the editor of Sounds at the age of 19 with probably the most demented CV he's ever seen in his life, detailing all my responsibilities to the band. You know, I said I'd paint their backdrops and I'd design their record sleeves, and you know, I make their costumes, and I'm their lighting engineer when we go on tour, and of course, I'm also the bus mechanic, said very proudly. And I don't know, he must have looked at this CV and these 2 little fanzines and thought, Jesus Christ, I've never seen anything like this in my life. Why didn't this girl just send in a review, you know? But something must have captured his imagination, and he actually wrote to me at the age of 19 and gave me a job. And I'll never forget the day. There was a guy who was very good to us, actually very gracious. His name was Fez, and he was a computer scientist, and very occasionally we were allowed to use his shower. And he came to the car park one freezing, bitterly cold morning in the depths of winter and knocked on the bus door, and I thought, Jesus, Fez is here, what's happened? You know, somebody died or something? And he handed me this letter with the Sounds logo in the corner, and it was a letter from the editor saying, you know, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you better come and have a chat with me, you know. So again, it was kind of like, it was just my passion, I guess, that kind of drove me into that situation. Leapfrogging forwards, which I'll obviously, this story could go on forever, but, you know. Leapfrogging forwards, I guess probably many of you in this room know me as Anne Hobbs from BBC Radio 1, and I'm often asked the question, why did you leave Radio 1 after 14 years? Why did you just resign? There's never been another presenter that resigned from Radio 1, but again, to cut a long story short, what had happened was I was supporting music that I believed in so passionately. We were breaking artists as significant as James Blake, as Flying Lotus, as Burial on the show. But I was kind of buried away in the dead of night, and I thought, Jesus, you know, I'm broadcasting in a dungeon at 2 till 4 a.m. and I feel like I've achieved absolutely everything that I can in this time slot. So I'm going to leave and I'm going to go and see if I can find a better platform for the music that I really love and that I really believe in. And so I decided to return to XFM, and XFM completely understood the vision that I have, and they gave me a primetime Saturday night platform. But XFM's story is also an extraordinary one, and it's a big part of my history. And I would say, going back 20 years, we launched the network in London, and initially we were just pretty much broadcasting to Camden during 1 month of a year. Camden is about the size of the Northern Quarter, you know, but we really felt like it was the revolution, you know. We thought, this is completely amazing. We're changing the way that people listen to the music that they love and access the music that they love. And I remember Chris Parry at the time, who had put all his personal finances into XFM. He managed The Cure. I'm sure a lot of you know The Cure, the band. And he also owned a record label called Fiction, which he sold so that he was able to keep XFM afloat, along with a giant collection of very expensive boats and yachts that he had to sail around the world. He sold the whole lot because his belief in XFM was so powerful, and his passion for the radio station was so powerful. And, you know, I think today XFM still represents the same thing for me. It's a station that's willing to take a risk, and it's really willing to put some phenomenal music on a primetime platform, you know, that I just couldn't find at the BBC. And I'm really, really delighted to be able to have that platform today. And again, it's as a consequence of people's great passion, I think that these things come to pass. Again, just moving forward to another topic that's related, people frequently ask me about my heroes, and I would have to say Steve Jobs is one of my great heroes. And if Steve Jobs would have walked up to me in Garston when I was a little kid growing up, in this tiny village with an iPhone in his hand, I really would have thought he was the son of God. There's no two ways about it, I really, really would. But interestingly, at the moment, I'm reading his autobiography, and in his autobiography, he talks about, the author of the autobiography talks about Steve Jobs' reality distortion field. I don't know if any of you have ever read his book, but it's really fantastic. And Steve Jobs' reality distortion field is a phrase that was coined by many of the employees that work for him at Apple. And what it really means is that when Steve came to them with an idea that he thought was phenomenal, but they thought was completely impossible to achieve, they named it Steve Jobs' reality distortion field, and it became something that traveled a long distance, this phrase. But for me, I kind of look at that and I think, all that really is a distillation of Steve Jobs' great belief and great passion in what could be achieved and what his team were really capable of. And it was his passion and his great desire to achieve those things that kind of drove his ideas through and gave us this amazing kind of spectrum that we have now of, you know, the world of personal computing and all the amazing innovations that he created to give us the tools that we need really to shape this century. And you know, it's kind of interesting because I was thinking this morning, all of us could do with a reality distortion field in our lives, couldn't we? You know, to help sort of move things on. And finally, I just want to end by saying one thing, I guess. Every day when I look at the news, and I'm sure you're all the same, all you see is doom and gloom and terrible prophecies about the human race, you know, economic meltdown, ecological disaster, all of these things. And I think it's very easy to become deeply depressed about these things, but I would say to you, when you're feeling like that, take a step back and broaden the frame. And surely we have to think to ourselves, Jesus, you know, we are the only people, the scientists will probably give you a more accurate measurement than me on this, but we're the only people in a situation where we find ourselves, we're on this rock, aren't we? And 1 billion light years in every direction. There's nothing else. There's nothing at all. There's just infinite space. But we happen to have this sun that warms us and creates an ecosystem. And not only that, but we happen to have been born into the West, into the 21st century. We weren't born as insects. We weren't born into Africa where our crops may be failing, we may be starving. We're born into the West, into the 21st century, where we have every conceivable resource at our fingertips. And sometimes you've just got to think, Jesus Christ, what are we waiting for, you know? Let's do it. Whatever we dream of, let's do it. And the last thing that I want to say, I say this a lot, but, you know, when people ask me for advice about what pathway they should take in your life, I just literally have one sentence, which is, charge at your dreams and never look back. And thank you.